So after making my top 10 PS1 games video, I realised I actually had a lot more fun making it than I thought I would. Between just making the video, finding video for it and editing it all, it was just a really enjoyable experience. So I might just keep up with the top 10 list for a little while. They're a lot more fun to make right now. While the PS1 list was really easy to make because I didn't play that many games, and even when I found the top 10 it was really easy to find them, and even to rank them from 10 to 1 it was very easy. I don't think there was even a point where I second guessed myself. For the PS2 however, not only were there a few more games that I played, it was definitely a lot harder to rank them, and I had to cut some that I really didn't want to. Games like God of War, or Jack and Daxter. I even wanted to put Hello Kitty Roller Rescue on this list because I genuinely think that is a really underrated game that nobody talks about or probably cares about. And a lot of people probably write it off because, well, it's a Hello Kitty game. So I just wanted to give that a little shout out. Call it an honourable mention if you will. And while I didn't have a PS1 as much growing up, the PS2 was in my life a lot longer. And between all the remasters that came out even after, there was definitely a lot more to choose from. This is mostly a one game per franchise kind of list. It wasn't necessarily a rule for me, but I feel like I was definitely more likely to cut certain games out of this list if there was already a game from that franchise here. So with that out of the way, here are my top 10 PS2 games of all time. Number 10. The Rocky series is something I've loved a lot since I was around 12. And even though I couldn't really watch the movies because I really just wanted to get to the fight scenes, I still did enjoy them quite a bit, especially the fourth one. Rocky Legends is basically a game where you can play through like a campaign of between all the four boxes between Rocky, Clubber Lang, Apollo Creed or Ivan Drago. It's basically just a round by round fight and with training in between, and you go through the story of how they went from the start of their career up until the end of the movie. I've played through this game so many times, especially as a child, and I go back to it every few years because it's a lot of fun. The fighting is really satisfying, the training is always a lot of fun, and even though I'm generally not a fan of sports games, boxing games can generally get a bit of affection from me. And of course being based on one of my favourite movie franchises ever definitely helps. And even if it's only number 10 on this list, it's definitely a game I can recommend to any Rocky fan. Because whether I was playing this by myself, or with my friends, or with my brother, we always had a great time. Number 9. Just realised I have two sports games next to each other on this list, and that feels weird to me because, like I said, I'm really not a fan of sports games. But the Tony Hawk franchise was probably one that broke through that barrier for a lot of people. There were a bunch of Tony Hawk games on the PS2. I don't even know how many at this point, but this was easily my favourite. I love playing through the 10 levels I think it was, and I played through again. I don't think I played through many times. I used to love creating characters based off some of my favourite TV shows or movies that I saw at the time. Even if I would probably cringe a lot if I was to look at how they looked now. Back in the day that was one of the most fun things to do. And building my own park was also just a ton of fun in this game. I used to spend hours on that every time I would play the game. Just even though I haven't played this game in probably over 10 years, I still remember most of the levels. I probably remember most of the... I could probably play through this game easily right now and remember where most of the things are if I was to go back to it. Also a lot of fun unlockable secret characters like Wolverine. I think Darth Maul was in this one. I don't know if Spider-Man was in it or if that was just in 2, but there were a lot of silly fun characters you could get to. While most of the people talking about how much they love this series seem to go back to the Tony Hawk 2, this was definitely my childhood one that I played the most. And definitely one I would love to see a remaster of again today, because I would definitely play through this game another few times if it was to come out again. So this is definitely my favourite of the Tony Hawk games, and one I spent countless hours on as a child. Number 8. It was hard to pick between The Sims 1 and The Sims Busting Out, which are the only ones I played in that time frame. But this one beat out the first one just about, just because of how much time I probably put into this when I was younger. I remember my copy of this game was so scratched up and, well, busted, that I would just have to put it in and take it out and try to clean it and reset the PlayStation about 20-30 times before it would even start up. It was always a gamble if I would even get to play the game when I tried to start it. But when I did, I absolutely loved it. Playing through the campaign was always a lot of fun, but the main thing to do was the free play, just to make your own family and mess around and do the crazy things that everyone likes to do in The Sims. I feel like anyone who's played any Sims game for even a little while has some wacky, silly stories that they've done. Whether it's lighting someone on fire, or taking away the diving board to kill your Sims, or just locking social services workers inside little rooms with no doors or windows. Maybe I would have liked The Sims 2 more than this if I'd played it back in the day on the PS2, but I only have ever played that in the DS or the PSP. And while there are many great Sims games, especially around the PS2 era, this one has to be my favourite. Number 7. It was really hard to decide between this and Grand Theft Auto 3 to make the list, because while I definitely have more nostalgia for 3, I couldn't deny that San Andreas was just so much better. It just took the series in so much of a new direction. It added so many things, gave you so many new things to do. It just had to make this list instead. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was such a big leap for the series. And like I said, adding so many things. You could go to the gym, you could eat, you could just do pilot training. There was so much more to explore, and there was so much more to do. You could even swim for the first time. Characters were all more likeable. Some of the most famous moments come from this game. Some of the most famous memes, of course.
Let me get a number 6 with extra dip. I'll have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7, 2 number 45s, 1 with cheese, and a large soda.
And especially for back when it came out, there was nothing like this. Well, I actually never did finish this game. I played through the first island of this game many times when I was younger. And then I'd usually just mess around with cheats and just get out the Hydra and just have fun. And just cause chaos throughout the city. I don't even know what I could say about this game that isn't obvious already, because people love it today just as much as they did back then. And of course Grand Theft Auto 5 in a lot of ways might make this look a bit outdated. I feel like there's a lot of things this game does way better. It probably has more stuff than Grand Theft Auto 5 does. This is definitely one of the most mind-blowing games from when I first played it. And probably my favourite Grand Theft Auto game. And definitely my favourite of the PS2 generation.
Grand Theft Auto San Andreas.
Number 6. If you watch my top 10 PS1 games video, I'm pretty sure I mentioned that Resident Evil 3 was my favourite of the PS1 era of Resident Evil games. Well, this is my favourite of the next generation. Code Veronica has always been my favourite of the Resident Evil games overall, even if, funnily enough, it's one of the only ones I haven't finished, because it's easy to screw yourself up permanently, or at least make it more difficult for yourself permanently in the second half of the game. So unless it gets really terrible in the less than half of the game, I don't think this could change. I first played this game back when I was around 9 or 10, but only for about 2 minutes. I remember getting to a point where the zombies crawled out through a bunch of grates out of nowhere, and I just remember me and my brother scrambling to turn the game off and turn the light on. Well, I haven't finished this game. I have played through a good amount of it 5 or 6 times, and I've started a bunch more times too. It's the last of the truly classic Resident Evil games with the tank controls and the fixed camera angles and all of that stuff. I guess unless the remake of the first one came out after, I'm not really sure which one came out first. But this is my favourite Resident Evil game, and I feel like it definitely deserves a place on this list. I think it's definitely an underrated Resident Evil game too, because most people don't really talk about it as much. So who knows if the next remake is going to be 4 or this one. I really hope they don't forget about this one, because I would definitely love to see it get the same remake treatment as 2 did. Number 5. It was pretty hard to pick between 2 and 3 for the best Ratchet and Clank game, because in the PS2 era especially, they really had the best. Even Gladiator or Deadlocked was a really good one, even if it doesn't match up as well for most people. But I just had to go with the one I spent the most time on. I played through this game so many times when I was younger. I played through the challenge mode or New Game Plus probably 5 or 6 times in one save file. I remember getting everything done, every weapon upgraded to the top level. Even playing the multiplayer, sometimes with a friend, even playing it by myself against the AI was a ton of fun that I put so many hours into. I think Ratchet & Clank is one of the best franchises of all time, especially in the PS2 generation. So for this one to reach the top, that should really tell you a lot about how much I love this game. There isn't a bad game in the Ratchet & Clank franchise on the PS2, but this one just managed to go a little bit above and beyond for me. And Dr. Nefarious was a fantastic villain, especially back here before they had him overused in every single game they made. But back then he was a new, original and very fun antagonist to go up against.
Responsible for this outrage. I believe it was a Captain Croc or something.
You'll always be the love of my life.
Number 4. I should probably point out that at this point, we're not just going into my favourite PS2 games. Some of the upcoming ones are some of my favourite games of all time. At least the next 4 games on this list are easy contenders for my top 10 games list of all time. So number 4 is Kingdom Hearts 1. It was a real struggle to decide which Kingdom Hearts games and where it would go, but in the end I think I had to put Kingdom Hearts 1 here. It was the first game in a franchise of a very unexpected crossover between Square Enix and Disney. And while it's not really as much of a Final Fantasy Disney crossover I think as people make it out to be, considering that the Disney characters and Final Fantasy characters really don't interact at all, except for Donald and Goofy, it is still a magical experience to go through. This was back when Kingdom Hearts used to let you go through Disney worlds and not just play through the exact same story as the movies. So it was like they built their own experience based on the movies instead of just copying them. I think the real draw of Kingdom Hearts 1 as opposed to some of the others is just how simple it is in comparison. It was before any of the nobodies or the time travel or creating any weird things. It was just a simple story of trying to rescue and find your friends and defeat the bad guys. While this game definitely has a lot of problems, from the platforming, the combat can be clunky, even just finding your way around some places can be really inconvenient. The characters in this game are some of my favourite in any video game ever. And while the characters from later games are great too, most of them, I think this one had the most solid core cast. Sora, Riku and Kairi are still some of my favourite Kingdom Hearts characters no matter how many they come out with. And with the game just a matter of weeks away from its 20th anniversary, I still think I love it a bit more every single time I play it. I'm still finding out new things about it, still discovering new secrets, and I've played through this game so many times between the PS2, PS3 and PS4, and I will probably play through it another 4 or 5 times if it comes out on the PS5. It's a franchise that has really stood the test of time in most ways, and people are still very passionate about the game 20 years later. And with the rumours of a remake coming up and a TV show, I'm not even sure if I want them, but partly just out of morbid curiosity sometimes, I can't wait to see what they do next, for better or for worse. Number 3. I'm sure for most people, Metal Gear Solid 3 is not only their favourite Metal Gear Solid game, but for a lot of people that is their favourite game of all time. For me though, I just have a particular love for Metal Gear Solid that just goes above any other game in the franchise. Peace Walker is the only one that comes close, but it's kind of a very different reason kind of thing. I don't know if it's more because it's the first one I ever really played, or if I just kind of like the style of 2 before it went into proper 3D stealth. But this game is easily one of my favourites of all time. A lot of people didn't like that you had to play as Raiden in this game instead of Snake. But for me it wasn't really a problem because, like I said, it was the first game in the franchise I really played. So it was all the same to me to play as a different character. The Tranquilizer Gun was one of my favourite additions to a game ever, just because I always thought it was fun, even as a kid, just to shoot an enemy in the leg and just leave them there and just wait until they pass out normally. That was even more fun to me than just getting a perfect headshot and knocking them out instantly. I think the boss fights in this game were some of the most fun and entertaining out of any of the Metal Gear Solid games. I thought the silliness near the end of the game was just a ton of fun. And I just think from start to finish this game was almost just purely perfect for me. I don't think I could even count how many times I've played through this entire game from start to finish. I even came really close to finishing on the hardest difficulty, but the end was just a bit too much for me. I think if I was to do a top 10 games of all time list, this would easily be in the top 5. It's one of my favourite games ever made, and one that even talking about now makes me just want to play again.
Tomorrow will bring sun or rain. Which one of these will show?
Number 2. Well, I said this game was mostly one game per franchise, but this was the only one where I couldn't possibly leave Kingdom Hearts 1 or 2 off this list. Even while making it, I really couldn't decide for a while which Kingdom Hearts game would go where. It's still a toss up between 1 and 2, which one I really like better. And while I appreciated Kingdom Hearts 1 a lot more in a lot of ways, I think I just had way more fun with 2. It was the first Kingdom Hearts game I ever played. While I wasn't exactly a huge fan of Disney back then, I was still a massive Final Fantasy fan, so this was just perfect. We'd have all the Final Fantasy characters showing up throughout the game. It didn't even need the Disney for me at that point, just having a bunch of Final Fantasy characters in one game was enough. I think like Metal Gear Solid, I can't be hard on the start of this game where you play as Roxas either, because when I first played this, I had nothing to compare it to. Playing as a different character meant nothing to me because I had no idea who Sora even was. It has a very slow start, but that's never really bothered me in games. I enjoy just chilling with the characters, and I feel like it's a very split thing about the opening few hours of this game, where you either absolutely love it or just completely hate it. And while this is the second game by number, there was also a game in the middle called Chain of Memories, which is probably kind of important to play. But I don't even know if it was on the PS2 at that point or just the Game Boy Advance. But I feel like even if this was your first one, you'd still be mostly okay. I didn't have too much trouble understanding it, and it was my first one ever. I feel like if I had made this list a year or two ago, I probably would have put 1 above 2. But after playing through the second one on Critical and doing everything on Critical, and doing all the secret ending and all the secret bosses and all that stuff, I just had a bit more of an appreciation towards it. Between doing all the data fights in the game and fighting Lingering Will for the first time ever, something about doing all that just made me appreciate the game and the combat and everything about this game way more. I know I said this for the other games on this list as well, but the amount of times I played through this, I couldn't even count. I probably played through this 5 or 6 times on every console I played on between the PS2, PS3 and PS4. It's probably one of my most beaten games of all time, because every time I go back to it I have just as much fun with it as I ever did. A lot of people have this as their favourite Kingdom Hearts game, and again, their favourite video game of all time. And at least right now, I definitely agree on it being the best Kingdom Hearts game. It's hard to choose between a game with so many great entries. And honestly, I think between 1 and 2, any of them could have made this list. Any of them could have been on the top even. And if it wasn't for one game, this would have been the top of the list.
Kingdom Hearts 2.
Number 1. And this is it, my favourite PS2 game ever. Final Fantasy X is just a game that I am absolutely passionate about. And I have put hundreds upon hundreds of hours into this game over the years that I've played it. Since I was the age of like 10 or 11, I've probably put about 10 different save files of this game to have over 200 hours in it. When I was really young, I remember my older brother brought this game home, saying he got a new Final Fantasy. And at that time, I still liked Final Fantasy, especially 8, but it didn't really mean much to me at the time to hear a new Final Fantasy. But I watched him play it for a while and I had fun with it. I never knew just how much this game would have an impact on me. It's easily my favourite Final Fantasy game of all time, and nothing could even come close to that. It has my favourite cast of characters in any of the Final Fantasies. I love the story. It looks absolutely beautiful. I love the battle system. I think the leveling up system is probably one of my favourites. I love when they have kind of alternate leveling systems. And Blitzball, I often put more time into Blitzball in a new save file than I would with the normal game for a while. You can get something at the end of this game, and I'm pretty sure there's 2 ways to do it. You can either hope to get it in a Blitzball league, which you can get by resetting the game and loading it up to do it faster, or you can play 100 games. And every single time I've ever gotten it, it's by doing the 100 games. Because for me, Blitzball is definitely the best side game, maybe in any game ever. The game has a ton of post-game content, from secret bosses, even added in later optional super bosses, the celestial weapons, which have some really easy ways to get them, some that are kind of notorious for being really difficult or just kind of bullshit. I mean, the 200 lightning dodges is going to take half an hour and be really stressful, even if you do it perfectly with an exploit. The butterfly catching game was just probably the worst. And anyone familiar with the Chocobo mini-games probably just doesn't want to hear about it again. But overall, there was just so much to do in this game, even outside of the really long main storyline. And I probably will do it again a bunch more times throughout my life. This is a game a lot of people are passionate about. There's some big channels even now who got their start playing through this game. People are still out there making mods for it just to make it more difficult, because they know the game so well that they want to be able to play through it again but make it more fresh and difficult for themselves. And I feel like a big reason this is my favourite is because it is the only game in the world I can think of that me and 3 of my older brothers absolutely loved. Every single one of us has played through this game many, many times. My friend absolutely loved this game. I remember even just talking to a random guy in school that I never used to talk to about this. So it's not just a game that I love, it's a game that I love that's very important to me and very important to some of the people that are closest to me too. And for all those reasons is why this is at the top. It's the reason why nothing can come close, and there's the reason I go back to it so often to play it through again. Because for me, it is just pretty much the perfect game.
Listen to my story. This may be our last chance.
And that's my top 10 PS2 games of all time. The list is probably the most likely to possibly change over time because I haven't played every PS2 game. Sometimes they remaster them, and there's even some remasters I haven't played yet. So it's very possible some of the lower numbers on this list could change over time. Next time will be the PS3 games, and that's going to be a much bigger thing. Not just because the PS3 was like the first console where I really got into gaming, like right from the start of owning it, but I don't think there's any console where I played more games. Between PlayStation Plus and just all the sales that went on and sharing accounts with brothers, it's going to be a lot more to cut down. And as always, tell me what your favourite games are below. I know the PS2 is a very big console for a lot of people. It is the best selling console of all time, and so many people have just some of their most wonderful memories growing up with this console. And of course, any stories to go along with why they're your favourite games, I love hearing those too. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you for the next one.